Daniel Mercer thought he had found the perfect bargain when he rented the upstairs room of an aging house, but within days, strange tally marks began appearing on the walls. Claire Henson, a student looking for quiet and solitude. Uncovered photographs of strangers sleeping in the same bed she now occupied. Both believed they were alone in their discoveries until the room revealed its true nature and the counting began again. The house looked harmless from the outside, but the room upstairs told a different story the moment I stepped inside. I had rented it because the price was almost unbelievably low. In this part of town, rooms were never this cheap unless something was wrong. Still, I was desperate, and the landlord seemed eager to hand over the keys without much conversation. He didn't ask questions, didn't linger, and when I signed the papers, he avoided looking me directly in the eye. That should have been my first warning, but I ignored it. I told myself old houses carried histories, and I could live with creaks, stains, and odd smells. When I opened the door to the room, the air hit me immediately. It was stale, heavy, and almost metallic, like the taste of pennies on the tongue. The curtains hung low and moth-eaten, blocking out most of the sunlight. The walls were discolored, as if they had been scrubbed again and again without success, leaving faint reddish-brown marks spread unevenly across the surface. The floorboards looked warped, with faint lines running across them, grooves cut deep into the wood. At first I thought it was just damage from moving furniture, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. Those were not scratches from chairs or tables. They were too deliberate, too carefully spaced, as though someone had taken a sharp object and carved them with intention. I dropped my bag on the bed, trying not to dwell on it. The mattress sank heavily beneath the weight, producing a faint, stale odor that rose into the room. I cracked open a window for fresh air, but the glass rattled like it had been waiting years to move. Even with the breeze, the room felt thick, as though I had stepped into a place where air didn't belong. That first night was worse than I expected. I lay awake listening to the house breathe around me, the faint moans of wood shifting with age. I had lived in old buildings before, but this was different. These noises weren't random creaks. They came in patterns, steady, repetitive, almost like footsteps pacing back and forth. I pulled the blanket to my chin, trying to silence my thoughts, telling myself it was just the wind pushing against the structure. But the pacing went on for hours, measured and precise, pausing only to start again near the corner of the room. My heart pounded so loud it filled my ears. I shut my eyes tight, convinced that if I didn't look, nothing could happen. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of silence too deep, too unnatural. The kind of silence that made your skin crawl, as if something was holding its breath in the dark, waiting for you to move. The morning light made things seem less threatening, at least for a while. I forced myself out of bed, stretching stiff muscles, and when I glanced at the floor beside the mattress, my stomach tightened. The scratches I had noticed the day before seemed darker now, fresher somehow, like they hadn't been there long. I crouched down, running my fingers over them. They weren't random lines at all. They were straight, carefully aligned, like marks counting something. Tally marks. Dozens of them, carved deep into the wood where no chair or table could have reached. I stood quickly, shaking my head, refusing to let panic take over. Maybe some past tenant had a strange habit, or maybe it was just vandalism, but when I leaned closer I could see that the wood around the marks was clean, the edges sharp, as though the carvings had been made recently. That was impossibly had been in the room the whole night. I left for most of the day, walking aimlessly through the city just to avoid going back. But no matter how far I went, the thought of those marks tugged at me, like a whisper I couldn't shake. When I finally returned, the sun was dipping low, and shadows stretched long across the staircase. My hand trembled slightly as I unlocked the door. The room was quiet when I entered, too quiet. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to gather courage. Darkness came quickly, swallowing the walls in heavy shadow. I kept the light on, but even the dim yellow bulb did little to chase away the feeling of being watched. I tried to close my eyes, but then it came again, the scratching. Not from the floor this time, not faint and distant. It came sharp and steady, right beside the bed, as though something invisible was dragging a blade across the wood, counting, one by one. I froze in place, eyes wide open, staring at the dark corner. The scratching continued, closer, louder, relentless. And though I couldn't see anything there, I felt it, the weight of something standing just inches away from me in the shadows. The scratching sound didn't stop. It pressed into my ears, sharp and grating like nails tearing into bone. My body felt locked, unable to move as I stared at the empty corner. The sound grew louder until, all at once, it stopped. The silence afterward was worse. My heart hammered in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for whatever came next. I sat there frozen, the air heavy with the smell of iron, a faint metallic taste that clung to my throat. When morning finally came, I forced myself to believe it had only been my imagination. Lack of sleep, nerves, the strange atmosphere of the room, it all added up. That was what I told myself anyway. But when I looked at the floor, my breath caught in my throat. There were fresh scratches. The marks hadn't been there the night before. They were deeper, sharper, still dusting tiny flakes of wood onto the floorboards. Someone or something had carved them while I lay awake, listening. I tried to distract myself that day, leaving the house and wandering aimlessly. Cafes, crowded streets, anything that felt alive and far away from that room. But the more time I spent outside, the more I realized I wasn't thinking about leaving for good. No matter how strange the room felt, no matter how frightened I was, part of me wanted to stay. The thought disturbed me deeply. It was as if the place had dug its hooks into my mind, making the idea of leaving feel impossible. When I returned that evening, the air inside was different. The rest of the house smelled old, musty, like dust and mildew, but the room carried that same faint metallic odor, stronger now. I lit the weak bulb and stood in the middle of the floor, staring at the walls. That was when I noticed the closet door slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it in the morning, but now it hung open just enough to show a strip of darkness inside. I pushed it shut with shaking hands, then placed a chair in front of it, telling myself it was only precaution. I wanted proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I set my phone on the nightstand, switched on the recorder, and tried to sleep. Hours passed. My body drifted in and out of shallow rest, waking at every creak and whisper of wind. When the scratching started again, I clenched my teeth, forcing myself not to move. The sound was deliberate, dragging and pausing, as though whoever or whatever was doing it wanted me to hear every stroke. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under despite the terror. When I woke, sunlight streamed weakly through the curtains. I reached for my phone with trembling hands and played the recording. What I heard made my skin crawl. The pacing footsteps were there, heavy and slow. Breathing filled the room, deep and ragged, not mine. And then came a sound that froze my blood, a low chuckle, distorted, like someone laughing from the bottom of their throat. It went on for seconds, too long to dismiss as interference. I nearly dropped the phone. The laughter was real. There was no denying it. Someone had been in that room with me. I tried to reason through it. Maybe the sound was distorted street noise. Maybe the footsteps were the house shifting. But no matter how many excuses I made, none could explain the tally marks. They were no longer only on the floor. As I lifted my head, my eyes locked on the wall above the bed. New carvings slashed through the paint, uneven but deliberate. And these weren't old. They were fresh, gouged so deep that small fragments of plaster littered the floor below. I forced myself to look closer, though every instinct screamed at me not to. Among the rows of straight lines, one stood out. It wasn't just a scratch. It glistened faintly, wet at the edges, as if it had been cut not into plaster, but into flesh. My stomach turned. I stumbled backward, knocking into the nightstand, almost sending the phone crashing to the floor. The realization struck hard and fast. The room wasn't recording me. It was counting me. Something unseen was watching every move, marking time, carving its record into the walls around me. I could leave. I should have left. But when I reached for my bag, ready to flee, I froze again. My belongings weren't where I left them. My clothes, my shoes, even the zipper of my backpack hole had been disturbed, shifted slightly, as though someone had been going through them while I slept. The final detail made my blood run cold. My wallet lay open on the table, and tucked into it, folded with careful precision, was a scrap of paper I had never seen before. On it was a single message, scrawled in jagged letters. "You're next in line." I stopped sleeping after the note. It wasn't only fear. It was the awareness that the room had become an organism, patient and deliberate. At night, every small creak tightened like a grip. The tally marks multiplied, spreading across the floor like a rash. I watched them grow with a numb fascination, as if each fresh slash finished a sentence that would explain everything if I could only read it. I tried to find logic by day. I scoured public records, pulled old rental agreements, and flipped through yellowed newspaper clippings at the library. The building had a string of short-term tenants and abrupt departures. One landlord's name kept appearing in the margins, a man who'd lived alone and then vanished from the records. People remembered him vaguely, as someone who counted things obsessively. That detail should have made me leave, but instead it hooked me tighter. At night, I set small traps. I laid string from the doorknob to a bell, pointed a camera at the bed, left a cheap recorder running. The first nights the camera showed only the room breathing. The floorboard seems like dark rivers. The recorder captured nothing but a low mechanical hum. On the fourth night it registered a rhythm, soft pads of a foot, a whisper of fabric, then the dull thunk of something heavy settling beside the mattress. When I played the footage back, my stomach turned. For a moment the image froze on a smear of shadow that did not belong to me. I thought cutting power might stop it. I pulled the bulb and lay in blackness, listening for any sign of life. The house kept the same pulse breathing, shifting, but the scratching continued. Just beyond the bed, I struck a match to see where it had been, and the flame revealed fresh wood dust and a small pile of splinters laid like offerings. The match died and the dark swallowed the proof, but the evidence became impossible to ignore. Sleep deprivation turned my perceptions into betrayals. I saw shapes in wallpaper where none existed. I woke with my sheets tangled and wet, the mattress depressed as if someone had sat beside me for hours. The metal taste of iron lived on my tongue. Once, while searching under the bed, I found a single blackened tooth wrapped in cloth. It was wrong in every sense. I kept it in a jar, as a record of madness or as a talisman, I could not say which. One night I discovered hair braided into a knot under the bed slat, thick and dark, foreign to me. Tucked into the knot was a tiny scrap of paper. Its edges had been burned, and on it, in cramped handwriting, were 3 digits, a number higher than any I had seen scratched into the wood. Beside the digits, someone had drawn an X through a circle. The symbol seemed to vibrate in my vision as though charged. The landlord grew evasive when I confronted him. He cleared his throat and offered an explanation about old houses. His hand shook as he handed over the rent envelope. He admitted tenants left quickly and that people sometimes counted to feel control. That should have pushed me out the door. Instead, it pushed me further into the spiral. The room began to claim more of my life. I cancelled plans, stopped answering calls, and measured time by the growth of the marks. One evening, the scratching moved higher, up near the ceiling where no hand could normally reach. It sounded like someone carving in slow strokes, a rasp that etched itself into the plaster. I climbed onto the bed and reached up, fingertips scraping against dry paint. Beneath my fingers, the air felt cold, like a film over something breathing. Pressing closer, I could hear, very faint, the echo of counting. It finally clicked that this was not random. The room accumulated attention. It collected names. The tally marks were not merely tallies. They were signatures, each one an account closed, a presence consumed. The ledger had been kept for years, and every fresh cut tightened its claim. I touched a mark near my pillow and felt its cold. A new cut bled into the wood beside it, and for the first time I understood that the room did not simply hold people, it reserved them. The tally would close soon, and the next entry would bear my name. I pressed my palm to the wood and waited for the inevitable. I began to mark time by the marks on the floor. Each morning I woke and counted them as if counting might keep me from becoming another notch. The tally marks moved closer to the bed in deliberate steps, as if some slow-minded animal were approaching a sleeping prey. Their edges were neat and final, not ragged like normal damage, but carved with a patience that made the skin at the back of my neck crawl. I tried everything to be ordinary. I cooked, cleaned, sat at the table and read, practiced the thin rituals of routine to show the room I belonged to ordinary days. I left the television on low. I scrubbed the marks with bleach until my hands cracked. I fluffed pillows and straightened sheets. None of it mattered. At night the house made its own sounds and the room answered with a low, repeating scrape. The first proofs came as small objects left in strange places. My keys balanced on the windowsill instead of the hook. A single shoe sat perfectly centered at the foot of the bed where I had never left it. Once there was a pile of wood shavings in a neat spiral, deep-colored and smelling faintly of smoke. Each item felt placed, not random, intended to be found. I bought a cheap camera and set it facing the bed. For 2 nights it recorded nothing but the ordinary. A lamp blinking, the slow pulsing of dust motes. On the 3rd night, the image froze for less than a second on a shadow pressed against the corner, a smear like the absence of light. The audio had a rasping undercurrent I could not explain, and when I slowed it down I could hear something like soft syllables, a measured cadence that suggested counting. Sleep became a theft I could not commit lightly. I napped in small, guarded pieces and woke with the taste of metal on my tongue. My dreams were not dreams but rehearsals, hands moving in slow rhythm, a figure bending to score a line, the same quiet counting whispering across me. When I woke, there were new marks. I tried to leave. Each attempt to make a break stalled at small sabotage. Once when I packed a bag, the zipper caught on the lining and tore, and later my keys were missing. I found them wrapped in a magazine folded under the couch. Another morning my phone lay under the pillow with the battery dead, though I had charged it all night. The room resisted my exits with petty measures designed to charm me into staying. In the days that followed, I learned that the room kept its past like a museum. Behind a loose board beneath the wardrobe I found a small, sealed envelope. Inside were yellowed tickets, a dried clover, and a scrap of paper with a list of names. A few became legible, initials scratched in an old hand, a date or two, and a word repeated that made bile rise in my throat. The word was not long, but it felt final. Accounted, I confronted the landlord. He deflected, then laughed too quickly and said houses had histories and people had quirks. He told a short story about a man who counted like a comfort and moved out suddenly one winter. His eyes flicked away when he mentioned the room, as if it were a place he preferred not to name. That reticence felt like confirmation. After that, the behavior escalated. The tally marks formed patterns now, not merely rows but arcs and intersections that made a half-map across the floor. They curved toward the closet, made a spiral at the door, and left a small cross by the bedside. When a fresh cut appeared at the base of the headboard one morning, it was accompanied by a thin, pale curl of skin, almost translucent. I could not say where it had come from. It was not mine. The strangest intrusions were the sounds that did not fit any source. A soft, wet rasp like fabric drawn across something, and then the slow, precise clank of metal. I folded that sound into my sleepless nights until one morning I found a jar beneath the mattress holding 3 pale teeth and a scrap of paper with my initials freshly carved into it. I thought exposing the room would end it. I pried up boards, tore wallpaper, and emptied the dark of old things. Behind a loose plank I found a bundle of photographs tied with string. Each image was a study in slumber. The same bed captured at different hours, faces turned to sleep, features slack or serene, a record of nights. I spread the pictures across the mattress and felt an ugly curiosity that mixed with dread. One photograph stopped my breath. It showed the bed from the doorway, and on the mattress, unmistakably, was me. The angle matched the lamp camera I had once set, but the date scrawled on the back read tomorrow. I held that paper as though it might burn and the numbers would fade. They did not. The photograph felt like a clock wound backward. I tried to think like a hunter. I laid flour along the threshold, stapled motion sensors above the door, and taped my recorder to the nightstand. I left the jar of teeth on display as bait and sat across the hall in a chair I could not settle in. When the scrape began, it came as a steady rasp that filled the floor like a second heartbeat. The sensors chimed to nothing. The flour sat untouched. My precautions had been anticipated. I went upstairs anyway. The bulb hummed and the bed looked made too immaculate to be mine. A new photograph rested face down on the nightstand. My hands trembled as I turned it. The image caught me at the doorway, chest heaving, and in the shallow blur behind me there was an outline of a person bending over the bed. The photograph betrayed presence my devices had missed. I stared at my reflection in the mirror propped against the wall. I wiped the glass with my sleeve and watched the person in the frame. My reflection sometimes lagged behind by a fraction, and in that tiny delay the mirrored hands did something my real hands could not recall. On the glass they moved in a smooth, practiced arc and efficient, exact motion of a blade brought to life by muscle memory I did not possess. An imprint of violence slipped into me like cold water. It was not a memory so much as an embroidery of sensation. The weight of a body yielding at last, the close metallic smell of a small sharp edge. I searched my clothes and drawers and found ragged cloth with dark stains and a strip of skin-colored tape stuck to a seam. Gaps in my recollection gave me an outline of nights I had not owned. Then a new tally began near the headboard. I watched, unable to move, as a fine line appeared in the wood, as if an invisible hand scored it with patience. When the dust settled, the letters beneath the line spelled my name. My finger brushed the fresh groove and came away filthy with wood dust. The room kept moving, the count advancing. I retched into the sink and laughed at the discordant noise. All the artifacts photographs taken ahead, the jar of teeth, pieces of clothing, the advancing marks combined into one impossible argument. The room trained those who slept there and taught them to finish the numbers. The ledger was not passive, it instructed the mirror, complicated that possibility. In glass my reflection smiled with a small, private curl that I did not feel. The hands in the reflection bore a faint stain near the knuckles. When I looked down, my wrists were only dusted where I had touched the letters, but the mirrored fingers flexed as if holding an unseen object, and then relaxed. The grin remained. Outside the city moved unaware. Inside the bulb blinked like a pulsing eye. The date on the photograph sat under my thumb like a verdict. I wanted to tear the room apart, to rip every inch of wood until nothing could be read or counted. But my legs were heavy with something that felt like resignation. My name lay carved in the wood, and the tally beside it weighted with a softness that felt calamitous. I reached into my pocket for the screwdriver.